Well, good evening, class. This is class 3, which is entitled Time Management. Hopefully most of you have already gotten your assignments in, so I appreciate you guys getting those to me. There are a couple of notes on the dashboard for Populi for this class, so I just want to make sure that you guys are aware of that. Also want to make you guys aware of the fact that there is a discussion this particular week. The directions are in the discussions tab of my class, Student Success. Scroll down to the discussions, and then you can post from there. If any of you guys have any questions about that, please feel free to shoot me a call, email, message on Populi, whatever might be more convenient. Again, please try not to message me on Saturdays. That's my day off as well as yours. So go ahead and do that. Yeah, I think that wraps up some of the logistics type stuff. Let's just go ahead and launch in. You guys had an assignment that was due this past Saturday about your time management skills. You were required to go through your calendars and really just say, okay, at a granular level, what is it that I've been spending my time on this week? And so hopefully that realistically should have been an eye-opening exercise for you guys. Some of the folks who are just the best in the world at what they do have gotten value out of this particular exercise. Multimillionaires, leaders of companies, CEOs, etc., have found really just some value in being able to go through and say, okay, how have I allocated my time this week? How much time has been, potentially wasted? How much time could be better managed, etc. So hopefully you guys were at least to some degree convicted by this exercise, or at least you have a better idea of what you do every day. Some of you, quite frankly, I'm not sure how you get everything done that you need to get done, but it's good to be able to see people who are busy, who are active. But I know that from this exercise personally, when I've done this in my own life, I get to the end of the week and I just think, wow, this is somewhat convicting. How our time is managed is ultimately, it's just an important aspect of stewardship for us as Christians to be able to look at, okay, well, God has given me a certain amount of time on this earth, and how am I using that effectively and efficiently and for God's glory ultimately? I think that you can hopefully took some things back from this assignment that you've been able to learn. Hopefully you're a little bit convicted about some areas where, hey, maybe I need to carve some time. Lord only knows that I've done this exercise and I've thought, wow, how is it that I spent this much time on Netflix or YouTube or my computer or in front of a screen every week? And so hopefully that's convicting enough that you can actually take that a step further. I know that at one particular section of time, my wife and I did something like this, and we said, well, I think we should cut out, watching TV for a month. And so we did that, and it was very enlightening to see how much time you actually really do spend at a day-to-day basis in that. So, as you're thinking through what you can do about your time management and, this exercise in general, I guess, kind of my tips to you are going to be like, in almost any evaluation, really, it's just like, what did I do well? What did I not do well? If I had an ideal week, what would that ideal week look like? This is kind of some of the questions that I'd like you guys to address in your future papers, is just, or what I would have appreciated you guys to have addressed in your current paper of a reflection. It's like, well, what did I do well? What did I not do well? How can I redeem the time that I'm using? Did I spend 3 hours on YouTube, or did I spend 4 hours a day watching Netflix? I actually had one student who said, a little sarcastically at one point, saying, if I continue to go at the rate that I'm going, I will be able to watch everything that Hulu has ever produced, which is funny, but also was very convicting for that individual, saying, I'm wasting too much of my life and my time to be able to be sitting in front of a screen watching television. So hopefully you guys got something out of that. And really, I have a couple of tips for you guys in terms of time management this week, and I think that hopefully these are very helpful for you. But I think ultimately the key to time management is really evaluating your priorities. The key to time management, I'm going to say it again, is really ultimately about evaluating your priorities. And so if your priorities are out of line, your time management's going to be out of line. If your priorities if you don't have a good view of those things, your life is just going to be out of balance. Something that I've been taught throughout the course of most of my life, actually, by my dad, is just, if you have a problem in your life, a lot of times it really does come down to your priorities. How are you allocating your time? How are you allocating your efforts, your energies, and what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Are you prioritizing your relationship with God? That's the first thing that my dad would ask me. When I'd say, hey, I'm having a problem. I remember this growing up. He'd say, well, how do your priorities look? And by that, he meant, are you putting God first in your life? Are you reading your Bible? Are you praying? Are you making an honest effort to get your responsibilities taken care of? And so, I think that somebody said it to me one time like this. They said 90% of the problems in your life, 90% of the problems in your life can be solved by A, either getting your priorities in line, or B, just working harder. And I don't know if that's necessarily a correct percentage, but I would say that looking at my own life and looking at, chatting through different life situations with various people, whether that's a mentor relationship or a student relationship or just a friend of mine or, even my spouse, it's like most of the issues in my life and in those other folks' life is like, if you can get your priorities straight and you can learn how to work really hard, you can solve a lot of the issues that are in your life. And so if I can have an encouragement to you guys today is just, hey, make sure that you're getting your priorities in line and making sure that you're working hard and to the best of your ability at whatever it is that you have on your plate, whatever responsibilities that you have on a day-to-day basis. And so another exercise in the kind of aspect of time management, or along the same vein in terms of priorities, is that often comes up is, well, Kyle, what should my priorities look like? If I was going to create a ranking system, what would be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of the rankings? What's number 1? What's number 2? What's number 3? Et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the exercises that I've done in this class is actually going through, and unfortunately we don't have the chance for direct, conversation and feedback at this particular moment. But one of the things that I've done is just said, okay, well, what's your number 1 in your life? And oftentimes students say, well, God should be number 1 in your life. That God's number 1. And, I want to address that with you guys because I think it's a very interesting concept, and I absolutely agree with the overall heart behind the fact that God needs to be number 1 in your life. And I think that for me personally, and I would say for most of us, actually, it's going to be more beneficial for us to think about not just that God's number 1, because I think that creates a sense of compartmentalizing things in your life. That's how I've seen it play out, at least, is that you compartmentalize things. Well, God is number 1, so I'm going to do this subset of things that, kind of check off the box that make God number 1 or God number 1 or whatever it looks like in your particular life. But what I've noticed about myself and the folks that I choose to surround myself with is that, God isn't necessarily the number 1. It's that, God is in the number 1, he's in the number 2, he's in the number 3, he's in the number 4. So oftentimes we go through and it says like, okay, well, what's number 1? Well, God's number 1. Okay, my spouse is, say, number 2, my kids are number 3, my church is number 4, my job is number 5. It's like, well, the issue that I have with that is it shouldn't just look like it's a lot more difficult in process to look at that as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's that God should be in your relationship with your spouse, that God should be in your relationship with your kids. God should be in your relationship with your coworkers and your job and your responsibilities on a day-to-day basis, whether that's job or you going to gather for him full time or whatever has, that particular slot in your life, or, and God should be obviously involved in your local church and your service of your local church. And so, if I can make an encouragement to you guys again today, is just that, hey, that God needs to be in every area of your life. He's not just a subset of, well, am I reading my Bible and am I praying every day? Okay, well, if I do that, then God's number 1. Am I going to church every week? Okay, well, then God's number 1. It's like, no. How are you letting God really interact with the other areas of your life, with your relationship with your spouse, with your relationship with your friends, and, all those different facets of your life? The next thing that I really wanted to chat through with you guys is this idea of God being number one, or God being kind of your main focus, the axis around which you kind of turn, or your world turns, to use kind of a turn of phrase. Or that idea of how does that interact with your local church? And oftentimes I think that these things really ultimately get confused. And I would submit to you guys today that your time at the local church and your idea of God being your central priority are two different things, right? That most of the time people lump those two things together, and the issue is that your relationship with your local church is not to the same degree or level that your relationship to God is. Now, I absolutely think that you should be volunteering at a church. I absolutely think that you should be going to church on a weekly basis. I think that that's part of you making God kind of just the central theme of your life. Now, that being said, I've seen people who confuse these things in priorities, and so what they will do is they will neglect their children, they will neglect their spouse, they will neglect their other responsibilities in life because the local church needs them. And so I'll give you an excellent example. I was volunteering at a high school ministry at one particular point, and there was a family there who was at that church probably on a typical week at least 5 times a week, through various ministries, or practicing on worship team, or running sound, or they ran one of the, I don't know if it's the greeting team or one of the teams for Sunday morning. They attended all the Sunday services, not just one of them, it was all of them, and they helped in the youth group, etc., etc., etc. And they had a daughter who was about 16, and she just looked down, and so I said, "Hey, how you doing?" And she goes, "Well, I'm okay." And I said, "Well, how you really doing? You don't seem okay." And I will never, to this day, I will never forget what she said to me in the kind of just brief interaction that I had following with her. It went something like, "You okay?" "No, I'm all right." And I said, "Well, what's going on?" And she said, "I'm having a hard time, and it's nothing particularly serious. It's nothing life-threatening. I'm not, going to go out and commit suicide. It's not, this life or death issue or whatever it is. It's just something that I think is serious in my own life, and it's having an effect on me." And I started to talk to my parents about this, and they stopped me in the middle of my conversation with them, and they just said, "Hey, we understand. We need to go and deal, and serve in this ministry because that's most important," or something of that nature. Is like, we got to go. I appreciate you talking to me about this or whatever it is, but we got to go, and I look at that situation, and then she looked at me, and I'll never forget the next sentence. She said, "I just wish sometimes I was more important to my parents than us helping out at this ministry." And the reality is that you all and I should be convicted by that and say, you're absolutely right. That your relationship with your daughter is much more important than you going and serving at a ministry 5 days a week. That in fact, your relationship with your daughter is a ministry. Because if your daughter or your son or your kids in general feel like you are neglecting them for you going to church every week and you helping out at a particular ministry so many times that they feel neglected, that ultimately is going to lead to difficulties in their life, whether that's them walking away from God entirely or just having a rougher go of it in general. That is not you stewarding what God has given you and your children correctly, and that is not you seeing your children as a ministry that is more important. See, I would care a lot more about a youth pastor that has his relationship with his kids in line more. That I would care about that more than I would about that person showing up to the church 5 times a week and making sure. You see this very frequently, right? That there's a stereotype of the pastor's kid, that ends up being, a terrible human being, oftentimes because their parent is, busy trying to help others in the church. And my response to that is that you need to take care of your child and your ministry in that child before your ministry at the church. I don't mean to make a blanket statement in that. I'm sure that there's a lot of pastors' kids who turn out excellently, but there is a stereotype for a particular reason. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say there. So I would just like to encourage you guys with that, and especially if you guys are thinking about going into full-time ministry in your local church as a full-time ministry. If you're thinking about becoming a pastor or a youth pastor or an executive pastor or children's whatever, if you're working in the local church full-time, I would just really encourage you to make sure that you are rigid about what priority comes where. And so if you guys need any resources in this particular topic, one of the ones that I've always recommended is called Choosing to Cheat by Andy Stanley. I think that he has some great perspective on this if you guys are looking for some further reading. So there's that. I guess by way of closing, the last thing that I really would like to say to you guys about time management is that this advice was given to me by a colleague of mine back, a few years ago, and we had a lot of interviews over time with people that we would talk to them about being successful, and we'd say, do you want to be successful? And they would give us this response. I would say, no, I want to be successful. I want to, I grew up broke and I want to be successful and I want to make money and I want to provide for my kids, or whatever the thought was behind what was driving them to be successful. They'd say, I want to be successful. I want to be successful, and I want to do well in my life. And they would say these things, and you could just tell in those interviews that they really felt it, like that they would, in many cases be almost on the verge of tears, talking to us about how, what their drive was to be good at what they were doing, to be successful at, their job or their rest of their life, whatever it has you to be a good husband, parent, whatever it was. And, time and time again, what was interesting is those people who, were tearing up, oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes had a really big issue with follow through, that they would get into a job that we had them slotted into, and they would not be good at it, and that they would continually have issues with time management. They'd continually have issues with whatever it was. And I had a conversation with my colleague, and he said something like, the measure of how much you care about something is not how deeply you feel it in the moment, but what you are willing to give up to get it. And I'm going to say that again because I think that is very important. That's been a very large guiding light for me in my life. It's just not how deeply do you care about something. It's what are you willing to give up to get whatever it is. If you're looking at getting to a better relationship with Christ, that you're going to have to give up some things in order to get there, right? That to have a greater relationship with Christ, you're going to have to give up some of your sinful desires and your sinful habits. That God and the Holy Spirit is going to convict you to get rid of some junk that you have in order to get to a closer relationship with Him. That if you want to be successful with your money, that you are going to have to sacrifice in the short term to be able to get to where you want to go in the long term, right? That, a good example is your physical health, right? What are you willing to give up in the short term to get to where you want to be in the long term, right? That you being in good physical shape requires you to go out and do something difficult on a day-to-day basis. You've got to go work out. You've got to eat right. I would love to tell you that you can get in great shape by eating pizza and drinking beer all day, every day. But the reality is that that's not true. That, I love pizza. That's the reality of it. But if I eat pizza every day, I'm going to gain weight and I'm not going to be in good shape. So for me to not eat junk food all day, every day is a sacrifice. And that sacrifice is where is going to get me to where I ultimately need to go. And so if you're evaluating something in your life, you need to think about, and I think what's helpful in terms of your time management is to say, okay, I want to be committed to whatever this is. I want to be committed to my spouse. Well, what are you willing to give up to be in a great relationship with your spouse? Well, sometimes you're going to have to give up your own comfort. Sometimes you're going to have to give up getting your own way. Sometimes you're going to have to give up sitting on the couch and relaxing after a day when your spouse needs your attention because they've had an equally difficult day and they just want to talk, right? That ultimately, what are you willing to give up to get what you want? And I think that it's an excellent exercise if you can actually go through and you can write down specifically, what am I willing to give up to get the things that I want? You know, you're looking at getting your AA from Gather for Him. Okay, what am I willing to give up on a day-to-day basis in order to get that, to accomplish what God has been calling me to do? If you feel like that's what God's called you to do, I hope that you feel like God called you to go to Gather for Him. Okay, so what are you willing to give up in order to get to where God wants you to go? And I think that, you know, the act of you writing that down and saying, no, these are the things that I specifically am willing to give up. I'm willing to give up spending an extra hour and a half to 2 hours of video games a day so that I can get my homework done. I'm willing to give up an hour and a half of my day job just so that I can be able to get my education and make a better choice for the long term, maybe. So if I can bring that to you guys' attention today, I would love for you guys, you know, it's not an assignment or anything, but if you guys want to go back and do that, I would highly recommend it. You know, if you guys have any questions about time management, any thoughts about time management, by all means, you know, I'm here to kind of talk through things with you, because I believe that this is ultimately, like I said, if you can get this down and you can work hard, that's going to solve a pretty large majority of your problems. And so, you know, myself and the rest of the staff at Gather for Him are willing to chat with you about that and to be able to help and work through things with you. Hopefully you've already got the first step done by looking at your time management and really tracking that for the past week. So again, you guys have assignments and very clear directions on the dashboard for Populi. Please go see that. If you have any additional questions, by all means, please put it on the dashboard or message me directly. We'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one.